go and put Bitcoin payments in whatever application you want. This is insane. We can literally move value in a way we've never had before. And you want to dismiss that?
Are Bitcoin payments taking off? Is Bitcoin truly being used as a currency? And if so, by whom? Who are the businesses and consumers that are using this new technology and why? We get into all of this in today's deep dive on Bitcoin payments with Breez and 1A1z. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. None of this should be construed as investment advice. If you enjoy the content, please remember to follow or share, as this all helps us greatly. We are always open to feedback or comments. Lynn and Israel are partners at Base Layer Advisors, where they employ their strong network of venture capital partners and startups to connect investors with unique opportunities within the Bitcoin innovation space. Alongside this, they support founders with their strategic growth and fundraising goals. Visit our website's advisory section to learn more. Welcome to Build with Bitcoin. I'm co-host Israel Munoz and joined with co-host Lynn Bairstow. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Danny and Dan for a deep dive on Bitcoin payments. So welcome, guys. How are you?
Very good. I'm looking forward to chatting all things Bitcoin and Lightning.
Great. Thanks so much for having us both. Really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So we're excited to get into the report that you guys recently published. Danny representing Breez and Dan with 1A1z. We can get a little bit more into what each of your organizations does. Let's just get right into this. Before the report, however, what's your Bitcoin story, Dan and Danny? What was your background before working on Bitcoin, and what particularly about Bitcoin is it that draw your attention?
Yeah. Happy to kick off first then, yeah. So I was actually had a cloud computing startup in Beijing and was interested in, distributed systems. Had previously got interested in like Austrian economics just as a personal interest, getting a little bit into gold. And then when I came across the Bitcoin white paper, really it was a combination of two of my interests, right? Distributed technology and sound money. So, I know lots of people sort of read the white paper and then forgot about it or came back to it later. I was fortunate enough that I was like, oh, this is really exciting, and didn't know if it would go anywhere back in 2013, but was interested enough just as a personal curiosity to start diving into it. Then I was on Reddit, and as everyone was at the time, and saw someone, user Beijing Bitcoins, just messaged them, and they ended up actually living in my building. Literally out of all the places in Beijing it could have been, he was like 4 floors below me. So when I met up in the lobby, and he sold me my first Bitcoin, and we went to the only bar in Beijing that accepted Bitcoin for drinks.
Very interesting origin story there. And out of curiosity, this was 2013. So that was before, I believe the big China ban was at the end of 2013, right?
Yes. Yeah. So this was like just post Gox lull, before China really clamped down.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what was I'm sure it was just like you're mentioning, kind of a few people getting together through Reddit, but was there any sort of community in Beijing at the time, Dan?
There was actually, yeah. I mean, the area I lived in had a few of the big exchanges, so like Huobi and OKX, back when CZ was CTO there. So there were a few like big exchanges and a decent, by that time standard, community on a WeChat group. But yeah, after that, unfortunately, a lot of those exchanges moved to Hong Kong or Singapore and, offshored. So definitely quietened down a little bit.
And Dan, can you just kind of get into a little bit about how you got from Beijing to 1A1z and what that firm does and is?
Well, that's a long story to go from the last decade and a bit, but yeah, I mean, the short version is I ended up sort of working in the blockchain space. So I co-founded a company called Hyperledger, which wasn't directly Bitcoin related, was just, enterprise blockchain for other applications, no cryptocurrency at all. And that ended up being acquired by a company in New York, which led me here. Most recently, I was working at Bakkt as a chief product officer, leading the product and operations teams. So Bakkt is a publicly traded crypto custodian and infrastructure provider for retail brokerages, trading Bitcoin and crypto. and left that sort of late last year. I'd done my stint in blockchain, done my stint in crypto, and my passion, the reason I got into this space was sound money and internet native payments and Bitcoin, and I wanted to focus solely on Bitcoin from there. So I took a little bit of time off, and then was chatting to a friend about actually how do Bitcoin core developers get paid, and we actually couldn't really find a lot of information out there. So that was the genesis for the first report that we co-authored, which you can find on 1A1z.com. And now we've turned that into an advisory firm that helps Bitcoin entrepreneurs, startups, commercialize their ideas and projects, particularly with things like financing, fundraising, go-to-market strategy, and M&A.
Right. Well, thanks for the background there, Dan. Definitely deep into the technology. And Danny, what's your background?
Yeah, I haven't been to China and back to get into Bitcoin. So my story's a bit different. I started my career actually in TV, and I wanted to do stuff like that. Ended up in the world of fintech. Kind of didn't mean to. I joined TransferWise back in 2014, and long and short of it, I thought that traditional finance, fintech, and that kind of fintech revolution was where it was at. And then basically in February of 2020, got a random kind of message about from a Bitcoin company called Paxful. And at that point, I was kind of, I'll be honest, totally not interested in Bitcoin whatsoever. Wasn't on my radar, other than I remember once at some work event, we gave away, the founders at TransferWise gave away some Bitcoin as a prize, right? So my journey kind of stumbled into it. My real passion was kind of financial inclusion. That's kind of why I took the job. I found it so interesting. And from there, I got to learn how people use Bitcoin around the world and meet various people. And that's kind of where my passion started. So back in 2020 to where it is today. Last year, I joined Breez to lead their marketing, and it's kind of been a really wonderful pathway in which I've got to learn about the world of Bitcoin, if that makes sense, and what's happening in various countries and how people use Bitcoin and that kind of world. And so that's where my passion kind of lies, Bitcoin payments, right? And using it as a medium of exchange. So from there, I just really found a passion of something I'm really interested in. And I think it's more the tech side, if I'm being honest, and what it can do and the technology and what it can do. I'm less bothered about the cult of Bitcoin, more so the practical elements and how it can impact day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting this is why we love to start out these episodes with how you got into it, because I think it really does shape how the journey progresses. Both Israel and I came from kind of startup investing backgrounds. And so we also, I think, are very attracted to it as a technology. And obviously one of the technologies that has so much promise is Lightning. And so you recently, the two of you published a report called Bitcoin Payments from Digital Gold to Everyday Currency. And there is a lot of conversation in the space, especially we're recording this in March of 2025. And there's a lot of talk about Bitcoin as a reserve currency with the passage of the U.S. executive order, establishing a Bitcoin reserve asset strategy for the country. But currency and medium of exchange is also so important. And so this report, I think, is super timely because it does kind of put the focus on that aspect of it. But instead of it being just an exploratory topic, you guys really dug deep and gave a lot of case studies about how much it's actually being used and the depth and breadth of it globally and what potential is. So we really want to dig into this and talk about the report. So first of all, why do you feel that Bitcoin is important to you to consider as a medium of exchange and not just a store of value?
Yeah, I kick that off. I think sort of, as you said, really that part of the narrative has been dropped in the last couple of years, especially in the US with the advent of spot ETFs and now the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy and the Bitcoin Treasury strategies, right? All those sort of three movers have been very much focused around this store of value digital gold narrative. And that's fine. That's good. It's obviously helping Bitcoin adoption, getting Bitcoin in many, many headlines and making people much more aware of it and making it a lot more credible. But that analogy to gold is sort of helpful to get people part the way there, but they sometimes forget that it is more than just that, or sometimes in some cases deliberately say it isn't more than just that. It is just gold to be bought and held as a store of value or an inflation hedge, or just an asset that, never needs to move. When, I fell in love with Satoshi's original vision of peer-to-peer electronic cash, of internet native programmable bearer instrument that anyone in the world can get access to and pay with. And having, obviously seen the power of the internet and what that's done for information, having the same thing for money is extremely powerful for global commerce. I think one of the things we tried to touch on in the report is yes, this has been tried before. There were some early attempts at using Bitcoin as a currency or even as a unit of account. And just because that didn't work, maybe, 2016 doesn't mean in 2025 or beyond, it not only can work, but it is working today. So really wanted to just, highlight that, yes, store of value, great, but that's not the be all and end all, and it is actually used, and the market, the infrastructure, the technology have evolved and developed, and don't forget that side of the story, because really it is a critical piece.
Maybe you can dive deeper into why it would even be important for someone to transact peer to peer, or what is the kind of the use case for decentralized payments?
Yeah, I think when you look at it to where Dan's kind of gone with this right now, is that there's first, let's go back, there's nuance of it's not just digital gold, it's also a medium of exchange. I think the black or white nature of how influencers or commentators talk about Bitcoin is unproductive to its actual bigger benefits. So then when we talk about what those benefits are, so to answer your question, there's many things that we need in today's age, right? So we can talk about the kind of high level benefits that we all understand as Bitcoiners. We talk about scarcity. We can talk about decentralization and how important those are to freedom and the way that money should move around the world without intermediaries. But I think even on practical benefits today, there are things that you just can't do, which is simply moving money from one jurisdiction to another instantly. That anyone who uses traditional finance today uses an intermediary, and it depends on where you are. If I want to remit money from here to Europe, fantastic, I could do it in seconds, not too hard. If I'm going to try and find that to a certain country around the world that maybe has a less sophisticated banking system, I'm going to come into high costs, and I'm going to come into into delays, right? So that's basic utility. But this go back onto the kind of other levels of why we need this money. Dan alluded to the way that information moves today. Information moves at the click of a button, and value should move at that same rate. And the fact that it doesn't online has caused unimaginable costs, loss of productivity. That has obviously created industry and creative work, but there's a more efficient, better model that we have with the technology that can benefit far more people. So to answer the question, there are many benefits, right? And we could go on about them all day, really. But I think one of the things that I think is very evident is that to have an internet native currency, or a currency for the internet, is so important to do all the things that we can do online with value, the same as we can information. I think that's, in 2025, that should be a no-brainer, right? It shouldn't be that hard. So that's kind of some of the benefits that we alluded to in the report.
There's truly is so much to unpack there on why decentralized payments are important, right? I mean, why Satoshi's peer-to-peer electronic cash system, as he stated, is such an important innovation. But I think even in the store of value discussions, when you look at the traditional gold versus digital gold discussions, even there, people shed light on the fact that this is more portable than gold, right? So even when we're focusing on the store value component, which of course, we all recognize is extremely important, and that in and of itself is also improving the world in a massive way. We're of course cognizant of that, but even in the gold store value discussions, you do see the spotlight being shed on the fact that digital gold, Bitcoin, has this property that it's more portable, right? Which gets us straight into this medium of exchange topic.
The symbiotic. Roy wrote a fantastic piece on this. The false dichotomy of Bitcoin being a store of value and a medium of exchange. And to answer the question, it is both, and it has to be both. And it's great that it's both. But what you have, a commentary or commentators that may have a louder voice within our ecosystem that maybe just say it's one thing and it's not the other, and it can't do this. And it's just such a naive point of view, because the technology is there to do so much more. And we see that. That's what the report is evident of. And we're not saying that it's dominated the industry today and it's this, huge thing and everyone's missed it. It's at the start. And that's what makes it even more exciting, right? And so to Dan's point is Bitcoin payments are not a new phenomenon either. They've been here, but we now have the tech that is able to make it a reality at scale, which is awesome.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Israel, I think digital gold as a term means slightly different things to different people, right? Some people think of digital gold being, put it in Fort Knox and hopefully it's still there. We'll see how the audit turns, but just, lock it away in the bottom of a central bank and use it as a reserve asset. And some people think of it in terms of its, monetary qualities from history of, 6,000 years of being used as a medium of exchange. It means slightly different things to different people. But I think, the term now has shifted more, is more predominantly used by some of the loudest voices to mean just buy it and hold it in a bunker somewhere.
Yeah, and the technology aspect that you touch on as well, Danny, I think is a big reason why this maybe flew under the radar, this medium of exchange component for a few years, because admittedly so, for anyone that's been involved for some time in the Bitcoin space, we can all acknowledge that the user experience has been a bit clunky, right? The portability has been a little hard to use, just frankly, right? So now we're getting to this point where the technology and the infrastructure is there to where it's facilitating a lot of kind of unlocking a lot of this value, right? So, maybe getting to the broader 1,000-foot view of the payments industry, what can you guys give us as far as a broad overview of what the payments industry looks like, and currently, what's Bitcoin's tiny role there? What's the market share? Get us started with this payments aspect of the report.
Well, I think when you're looking at Bitcoin payments in general, that to quantify payments in general is trillions. There was one stat that there's quadrillions that goes through rails of movement within the US that we wrote about at one point. But long and short of it, lots and lots of money moves, right? Bitcoin's part in that today is that you have $2 trillion worth of value, give or take now, obviously with the market changing, but say at the time of writing around 2 trillion, you have this value locked within Bitcoin. Within that ecosystem today, I know that River once mentioned about 14 trillion or between 14 trillion to 37 trillion moving at one point. But to park that up within our report, we're talking about Bitcoin payments today. And where's that as an opportunity? And so today, thanks to the Lightning Network, over 650 million people can be reached via the Lightning Network, which is, we're not saying everyone's using it by any means. We know that number is a nice, shiny number to talk about. But with the technology we've got, there's a reach of 650 million.
Yeah, that's
with it.
Accounts that have Lightning enabled and are available to use.
Yeah, exactly. So they're able to use it, 650 million. Now, within that ecosystem, there is a burgeoning amount of different businesses that are forming, whether that's at the foundational level of infrastructure all the way up to the merchant level of a luxury goods brand, and new verticals that possibly weren't even thought of before, or different interpretation of verticals like gaming has use cases that weren't possible that have kind of blossomed. So to kind of say is that today where we're at is the smallest fraction of this wider world of payments, of which some, you can look at the trillions of cost, of the trillions in volume that moves, but also the trillions in cost to consumers for payments, right? And so when you then start to look at where we're at, it kind of gets me even more excited because you are at the start of what this can be. And to your point, Israel, earlier, you said it's kind of gone under the radar. It most definitely has. For the last 5 years or so, a lot of the focus has been on that store of value. That number goes up, and it's such a great story, right? Everyone likes to see people make money, so they talk about it. But what's happening underneath is that infrastructure's now caught up to what the dream of Bitcoin initially is. And so we're at the start of a world in which millions of people can make payments with a currency that has so many properties that we need.
I want to be kind of sensitive to our listeners too, and just take a slight step back, because we're talking about Lightning, and some people may not understand exactly what the function of Lightning is or how it relates to Bitcoin, and how it enables payments on Bitcoin at a more rapid rate than the Bitcoin blockchain itself facilitates some. Can you just explain that a little bit deeper in terms of how does Lightning and Bitcoin relate to one another, and why Lightning is important in Bitcoin scalability?
Sure. I mean, Lightning, that's sort of super simple way to describe it is Lightning is a second layer that's built on top of Bitcoin. So if you think, people have bank accounts, one approach to making payments better would to make, bank wires or bank transfers much faster. And you go into a store and you do a bank transfer to buy some goods, right? That isn't the approach that the world's financial system has taken. They've taken the approach of adding debit and credit cards on top of that, right? So you can think of debit cards as like a layer 2 to bank accounts. And in fact, in the current payment infrastructure, that's exactly how it works. There are multiple layers, from the Fedwire or real-time gross settlement system to the commercial banking system to MasterCard and Visa and the networks on top of it. So Lightning is like the debit card for Bitcoin. It allows multiple transactions to be taken sort of off-chain, so they don't all need to be verified directly by the Bitcoin network. So you can send a bunch of transactions around on the Lightning network, and then periodically settle back down to Bitcoin and move it on the Bitcoin network directly. So it's a way to sort of trust minimize, or in some cases trustlessly move Bitcoin almost instantly and almost for free, rather than having to pay on-chain fees and be limited by the scalability of the Bitcoin blockchain itself.
And contrary to what some people may think, Bitcoin transactions, although they're not tied to you directly by name, you can trace who's made that Bitcoin payments by the Bitcoin address. But then it would seem that Lightning has greater privacy associated with it, because there are multiple transactions that can occur before it's actually written down to the Bitcoin blockchain. Is that accurate, Dan?
It is, yes. So you move the Bitcoin on chain, and people can see when you're creating a new Lightning channel or closing a Lightning channel. But while you're in the Lightning network itself, you can set up more sort of point to point, right? So you and I can have our own channel, and we can be sending Bitcoin back and forth, and that's not visible to anyone other than us and the people who are routing the transaction. Yeah, there's speed benefits, cost benefits, privacy benefits, and to the earlier point, right, on the technology evolving, it's still kind of shocking to me hearing people say, oh, well, Bitcoin for payments, they can only do 7 transactions per second, and it's publicly visible, and it's really expensive, right? Like, that hasn't been the case for years now, thanks to Lightning. It's another thing that we want to raise awareness of with this report.
You mentioned some terms there, which I want to kind of framework. So speed, access, and cost. Sometimes I get the feeling that lots of times when people are thinking about or hear about Bitcoin, yes, it's facilitating, like you're mentioning, more access or more speed. It almost, believe many people associate this with, it's maybe just some new technology on the current rails, on the current system we use, but miss the fact that this is a completely separate. I mean, it's a completely separate system, right? I mean, we're comparing two very different functioning systems, and that's, I believe, what lots of people miss. And in my point of view, I mean, that is just why you're not going to be able to compete with this technology in the traditional financial system, right? Because the traditional system, it relies on intermediaries. And here we're talking about true peer-to-peer value transfer, right? So in the report, Dan and Danny, I mean, can you give us an idea of what we're talking about as far as access, speed, and cost in this Bitcoin Lightning Network protocol?
But when it comes to access, I think let's talk about like how many people. I'd say with the number that's reached today with the technology, right? So that, as we said, there's hundreds of millions of people that can be reached with it, which is awesome. And we're talking about integrations into mainstream products that reach many people too. So from the Coinbases of this world, the Krakens, the new banks, which is for accessibility fantastic. Talking about speed, as Dan mentioned, negligible to even think about it, milliseconds in some cases, which is again fantastic. And then the cost, a couple of sats. So any ranging, obviously it can range, and there are other costs that go into it, but a fraction of the cost. So if you were remitting money with, traditionally we look at moving money, and in some cases we think it's free, but those hidden costs are elsewhere. With Lightning, the costs are up front and it's there. So from a speed perspective, almost instant, or I would call it real time, and their cost, negligible. And so that's what is quite cool about tech.
And cost-wise, and Danny knows the remittance space better than I do, but you're as you say, even with the hidden costs, right? It's 7%, in some cases up to 15% that you're paying a tax on people remitting money back home, plus the inconvenience and speed of having to go and pick it up. So there's large costs involved in that, and even in domestic modern countries with modern infrastructure, right? Even debit cards, credit cards, you may feel they're free, but the merchant is paying 2% to 3.5%, more than they would otherwise, be. So prices could be 3.5% less if the card networks weren't taking that large of a cut. So there is a lot of cost baked into the traditional system, as you say, like it is a patchwork of very old systems and layers on top, and Bitcoin and Lightning are an entirely new, independent, ground-up approach to do that.
Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River, a Bitcoin-only financial services company that I've personally been using for years. I really enjoy the strong focus they have on security and reliability, which ultimately leads to peace of mind. I know you're a big fan as well.
I am. I feel so confident referring people to River. In addition to what you mentioned, also they've got US-based phone support, which I think for somebody who's less familiar with the space or used to personal service is really helpful. In addition, they have a private client services division. So if you're looking to invest 100,000 or more, they have a special suite of services designed for you, whether you're a high net worth individual, a family office, or a trust. I also really appreciate the continued improvements they make in the back end so that reliability and security continues to be really apparent.
They additionally also have US dollar cash deposits paid out in Bitcoin. They have a yield product for that, which is an interesting alternative way of accumulating Bitcoin. Overall, fantastic suite of services. If you're interested in onboarding or opening up an account at River, use partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin for personalized onboarding.
And then just lastly on the access piece, right? Danny mentioned 650 million plus, right? That's just people with custodial Lightning accounts at exchanges or fintechs or banks. So I'll give a plug for Danny's company, Breez, right? You can also have, that doesn't include people who've got self-custodial Lightning wallets running, like Breez, running on their phone. And in terms of access, that is, as open as getting an email address anywhere in the world. Anyone can, with a smartphone, can do it. So just incredible layers of access when compared to those of us who are fortunate to have modern, infrastructure still, I can't send from Cash App to Venmo, and I can create a Stripe account and instantly spin up a new online business and accept payments, but that's not accessible to every entrepreneur in the world or everyone who wants to provide services. So they have to overcome, not just the prohibitive, payout and remittance costs that it costs to move money globally, but also just the lack of ability to get bank accounts or to get, payment processing capabilities. Now all they need is a smartphone. So I think that'll do, grow the global GDP of the internet by orders of magnitude over time.
I think one of the things that helped me understand or the light go on about Bitcoin as early as it did in my journey, which was between 2012, 2013, was having lived in Mexico and experienced the pain of trying to send money to an employee, just the whole difficulty of the payment system in a different financial environment, and just seeing the costs involved and the disadvantages for somebody who was excluded from a traditional financial system. So, that was obvious. And I look at just the efficiencies that from time, cost, everything. And I just can't imagine that more businesses aren't already adopting Lightning technology in order to move money globally and that. But in addition to these, what I consider very obvious use cases, your report also gets into some things that really excite me when I think about, what the future of finance looks like. And that's things like streaming pay-per-use services. There's so many times I look at my monthly bills of all the different, news, information, entertainment, music services that I subscribe to, and I can't possibly use them all. So it's like if I could just pay for what I used, I'd be a much happier consumer and I'd have more funds for Bitcoin. But anyway, that and also micropayments, just that ties hand in hand because it hasn't been able to just pay somebody for reading one article because the cost of paying 10 cents for an article wouldn't make sense financially, but it would in Lightning. Can you kind of drill down into these new use cases and what you see the potential, how Lightning can transform our financial system and payments?
I think a good example is a business like Thunder Games would not exist without Lightning. And Jack told us that for the report. He was like, the way in which they can reward their users, and in fact now obviously they've got new products that go with this. It's just impossible to do so from a modern day perspective. And what that does, it's not just okay, this isn't possible. It also brings in people into these verticals that they weren't able to get before either. People with different incomes, people with different financial situations. We just mentioned, Lynn, there about you were talking about experiences of moving money. Very privileged I am here in the US and obviously being from the UK. I've experienced relatively decent banking or decent banking experience to the point of that it hasn't affected me too much. But if you don't, those things are hard. And it means then you're shut out from global businesses. Imagine then suddenly opening up your business to anyone in the world instantly, and you can then move that micropayment instantly too. It's unfathomable, not only the productivity, but the value you're able to generate. And so I think Thunder's a really good example of a business that without Lightning doesn't happen. And there are many more like that.
Yeah, as you said, Len, like the costs of it, so 25 cents cost minimum, right, to do a micro payment or a small payment, which just makes a whole bunch of use cases unviable. And so the solution that everyone has to that is, either set up a recurring streaming service and hope you forget about it and pay forever, or you have to pre-fund accounts with, $20, right? So every service you want to use, you have to move a minimum of $20 into the account, hold a balance with them, and then draw that down and sort of top it up. And Stanley mentioned Thunder Games, as was it ZBD, who do Lightning-based gaming and rewards as well. And on the streaming side, Fountain has enabled podcasters and content creators to earn sats as people listen to their podcasts. And then you've got Nosta, which is a small but thriving, decentralized sort of alternative to Twitter or X social network where instead of liking, you're basically sending a small amount of money, zapping a few sats to the creators. So again, like you don't need to pre-fund, you don't need to send them a minimum of $5. Just with one click, you can send a few cents, and obviously in aggregate, that adds up to quite a lot of money for these creators. So those types of use cases are really just impossible with legacy financial rails.
Which to the point of use, we talked about X and Twitter there. I mean, if I was to ever think of a perfect use case for Bitcoin payments, rather than creating a bank and then having to get licensed absolutely everywhere in the world, I mean, they could literally just offer self-custodial payments to all their users, and then, I mean, anyone around the world can move money to anyone else in the world without intermediaries at a fraction of the cost, right? So to use examples not only of what is out there, of what businesses could do, X being a particular one, again, you're able to do things that simply they won't be able to do with the option that they're pursuing right now.
Yeah, there's, I mean, the amount of value that's untapped by removing intermediaries, jurisdictions. I mean, it really is, mind blowing. And of course, all of these micropayment use cases as well. And we did, we haven't even touched on AI, which, I mean, we're all living through this kind of AI revolution as well. And for anyone who's played around with AI, one thing you can quickly realize is these machines are a lot quicker, they're a lot faster than us. And it's not that big of a logical leap to imagine which technology they'll likely be using in the future. Likely something that's very accessible, very efficient, low cost, etc. So yeah, there's a massive amount of kind of opportunity and possibilities that this will continue to unlock. But maybe as far as currently, Dan and Danny, can you provide us, you went through some use cases as well in your report, some examples and an idea of how are Bitcoin payments being used today, and where are people spending Bitcoin? Is it certain pockets of the economy, retail? Is it luxury? Or what are the practical current use cases of Bitcoin for payments?
I mean, across there, it's a difficult question to answer, to be very specific on. I think it's happening across many different industries and across many different jurisdictions. One that I found particularly interesting was Mercari in Japan. And so Mercari is a huge marketplace in Japan with 23 million users. It's a massive, massive company. I think there's like 3 billion items that are on its platform. And they basically started by just offering the users a Bitcoin service where they could buy Bitcoin. And they saw the uptick was insane. Within basically a year, they'd seen, I think, 2 million users. By 18 months, it's 3 million. And they basically saw, they were like, oh, wow, our user base really is interested in Bitcoin. And so where they went from that is that they then implemented it as a payment method. And within the first month, they had 100,000 transactions with Bitcoin. And these are the kind of stories, and the reason I bring them up as a great example, the kind of stories you don't hear. But you're seeing that appetite. There are 23 million users. More than 10% of their users are already touched Bitcoin at some point. And not only that, you can look at them online. You could look at Pick and Pay, a South African retailer that accepts Bitcoin payments in store, and using really cool technology in which you scan it with your wallet, and the payment happens. The cashier doesn't have to do anything extra with a different POS. It's all integrated. So you have retail as well. So you've got online retail, and then you've got examples like Namecheap. Namecheap, I believe, have this is off the top of my head, 1.1 million transactions with Bitcoin, and that's wild, right? And so there's all these different use cases, and we can talk about luxury goods. We spoke to Hublot, who aren't actually featured in the report, but I was speaking to them about accepting Bitcoin. In fact, I even spoke to Ferrari about accepting Bitcoin. So we talk about someone buying a toothbrush, pick and pay. Next minute, you can buy a Ferrari, and I think that's the breadth of it. It's not one fits all in the same way that it's not store of value or medium of exchange. It's both, and that breadth of usage is wild. And I think that's one of the biggest surprises I had from doing the report is that where it is and people that are using it is fascinating.
Yeah, and Danny mentioned Namecheap and the number of transactions they've done, but they've had $73 million worth of revenue solely from Bitcoin transactions over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's almost like 25%-ish increase of revenue per user, right? So they're making 25% more revenue for every user having had added Bitcoin for purchasing domains online, which is a sort of natural fit for an easy internet native business. So real actual impact, meaningful impact on their top line and on their growth of their business just from adding Bitcoin.
Yeah, I wanted to shift from where consumers can use it to the benefits to business. And I think for a while, people thought, oh, if I just advertise that I take Bitcoin, I'll attract a level of person. But beyond that, there are the advantages to what you point out. I mean, the increase in their bottom line may not just be from new users, but would be also from efficiencies in payment, reduction in chargebacks, because you don't have the chargebacks on the Lightning Network. But from a business standpoint, how do they get help? Where do they go in order to incorporate Lightning Bitcoin payments? And does the consumer need to know that they're using the technology, the Lightning rails, in order to process payments? I mean, we talked to Zapright. They were one of our earliest interviewers, and to Parker, and just talking about how they're trying to make it kind of seamless to accept or make a choice. But can you talk a little bit, if you're a business owner, where do you go to kind of sort through this and to see what is the solution for your business?
I mean, it depends today what you're offering and the solutions are out there, but there are plenty of solutions out there today, from custodial services like BitPay. Obviously, you mentioned Zapright. You've got BTC Pay. It depends if you're looking to integrate Lightning into your app or service. You've got Breez. There are so many of these different services out there today to use. When you actually mentioned about why businesses do this, you're right. It's not just the bottom line. It is those other things that they're doing. Like a good example, when we spoke to PubKey, for example, when they're using Bitcoin, you're eliminating that cost of processing card transactions, which I think worked out at 25 cents a beer back in the pockets of the PubKey owners, which is great, right? And don't take these things for granted, because that's what's happening with the kind of intermediary tools today. A lot of these payment processors are taking that value that you can now get back with Bitcoin. But again, to answer your question, there's plenty of tools out there, and the infrastructure is far more advanced than it was when folks started accepting Bitcoin, maybe in 2014, I think it was, when Microsoft came on very loudly and was like, we accept Bitcoin, and then Steam and all of these. And they did so with the right intentions, I actually think. But the tech wasn't there. And so today, now you've got, not only is the tech there, you've got the businesses to service that need.
And then you mentioned like chargebacks and the issue there, and a couple of the examples we highlight from the non-profit sector are Water Trust and another water charity that are accepting donations in Bitcoin, globally, right? So getting more reach than they otherwise would. B, for lower costs, as Danny said, right? Whatever the transmission mechanism is. But to your point on chargebacks, that was, a serious problem for one of those. When you're a charity getting donations, you don't know, can I now use these donations and don't go and do good in the world, or is it going to be charged back later? And if it is, even if it's a $5 donation or a $5 payment, the actual chargeback fees can end up costing the business or charity $25, plus all the administrative overhead of actually managing and having to think about that. So the settlement finality of Lightning and the instant available of liquidity due to the lack of chargebacks, and the fact that once you send Bitcoin, it's sent. You're not, moving money on a credit card and then waiting 30 to 90 days for the funds to actually move and settle behind the scenes. It means that the actual velocity of the money, the availability of the money to the merchants, to the charities, is instant, and they can put that money to work straight away. And then on the, your point about sort of consumers or merchants maybe don't even need to know that they're using Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, we delineate between sort of Bitcoin as a settlement rail for fiat currencies and Bitcoin as a currency itself. I think, those two sectors are both important. Danny and I think would love to get to the Bitcoin as a currency end-to-end circular economy, but that's going to take some time and steps. And you asked about merchants accepting Bitcoin payments. They can be fully insulated from actually having to touch Bitcoin. Danny mentioned BitPay, who will take the Bitcoin, sell it for fiat, and give that to the merchant. So from that perspective, the merchant doesn't need to even change their, accounting, worry about volatility, worry about touching Bitcoin at all. It's all fiat from their perspective. Or they can use more Bitcoin native payment providers to actually receive and hold the Bitcoin, which has obviously been very beneficial for some of the use cases that we showed. And then Bitcoin entirely abstracted away from all users, right? A lot of the remittance companies we mentioned, like Osmo in the report, the user is sending fiat, the recipient is receiving different fiat. Behind the scenes, that's going in and out of Bitcoin, being transmitted over Lightning, and ultimately settled in a far faster and cheaper way. But the users don't even need to know or care that they're using Bitcoin, just as your users listening to this don't need to know or care about TCP/IP, the protocol that exchanges packets of information over the internet. So there is a wide breadth of how much the user and merchant needs to know and how much that complexity can be hidden away from them, but still provide benefit.
Yeah, and then there's a growing number of excellent service providers for this technology stack, Breez, of course, and many of the others that you both mentioned. So let's say I am a business or large enterprise, and I have a, let's call it, healthy skepticism of this new technology's capacity. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of different aspects of the economy that can move on to this payments landscape. We have recent news of the largest stablecoin provider, Tether, also moving on to the Lightning rails. As far as scalability is concerned, what would you say to someone who has their doubts? Will this technology or protocol stack be able to absorb all this demand? I mean, how scalable is it?
To shill another piece by Roy, he writes some good pieces. He talks about Lightning being the common language of the Bitcoin economy as well, and I think that's an important aspect to think about too. It is that Lightning can interconnect other areas and other developments, sub-networks, enterprises, etc., to each other via Lightning. And that's the Bitcoin economy being tied together with Lightning. Lightning will be that common language. So anyone who has that skepticism, whilst it makes sense, we should be skeptical and ask questions about the tech, but the tech is firmly won. And is that solution for the scalability issues that Bitcoin has? And that therefore means that we're able to reach far more people with the benefits that we've discussed throughout the chat so far, right? The privacy elements, the speed elements, the access elements, all of those things add up and contribute.
Yeah, and then its architecture is fundamentally different, right? It's not a blockchain, right? So it's not like Bitcoin itself or most of the other blockchains where every payment, every transaction is competing to be included in the same block and get processed. It is more of a sort of direct point-to-point solution. So, if we have one channel and Danny and Lynn have another channel, those are not competing or interfering with each other. So the capacities are entirely independent. So from that perspective, it is very scalable, with some nuance on you still have to create Lightning channels and close Lightning channels. But as Danny mentioned, Lightning not just connects to the Bitcoin blockchain, it connects to side chains like Liquid. There are new developments like Spark and Arc, which are other Bitcoin L2s that are Lightning compatible. And so we're starting to see not just, Bitcoin and Lightning, but Bitcoin and Lightning and Liquid and Arc and Spark and all of these different protocol suites actually working together and helping, further scale beyond just the high scalability that Lightning already has today.
Just to add to that, Lightning has no global state. And other blockchains or L2s, they require network effects. They require people to buy in. What Lightning allows, to Dan's point, which I think is really important, is it doesn't require those things. And so those other blockchains and where they get the nice shiny VC investment, they require that to kind of get the growth. Whereas Lightning is already able to inherit these network effects too, and is kind of ready to scale off the go. Whereas, as Dan mentioned, all those other blockchains and side chains and all the other stuff that kind of goes into it, in the end, that they have a scalability issue that Bitcoin has. And so that's why Lightning's best suited for the job it has.
I'd love for you to just drill a little deeper into the differentiator of Lightning and these other. I mean, Israel and I get pitched a lot from other quote unquote building on Bitcoin layer, cryptos that have their own tokens and, wrapped whatever. So it's like, and I think for the people who have not spent the amount of time to understand it, but can you just give a quick drill down about, I think increasingly Bitcoin is going to be used in marketing materials for these other side chains, blockchains, token projects. So what should people be aware of in terms of what Lightning is and how it's different from these other projects?
Yeah, that's a very new phenomena, right? For a while, it wasn't cool to build on Bitcoin. It was cool to create a competitor to Bitcoin, and that was the way that you created a token and made money and got VC investment. But that has shifted, right? Like now there's an explosion of A, people legitimately building on Bitcoin, and B, people claiming they are who may or may not be. And then, C, some people who just clearly aren't, but want to profit from, the affinity to that people have with Bitcoin. So, Lightning and start there is pretty unique in that regard, right? It doesn't have its own token. It doesn't have anything you can invest in. It is purely just an open protocol built on top of Bitcoin. So really how it works is you're just taking Bitcoin transactions and exchanging partially signed ones between each other. There is no new token. There's no pre-mine. There's no investors. There's no central organization that's controlling them. It is very decentralized, just like Bitcoin. And that's probably the biggest giveaway when you hear of something building on Bitcoin as a new L2. It's, how does it actually use Bitcoin and does it have its own token? And if I want to, not to get too technical, but if I want to take my Bitcoin that's in this L2 and get it out and back onto Bitcoin, do I have to trust anybody, or does anyone have to give me their permission for me to do that? Right? With Lightning, no token. Anyone can exit Lightning and go back onto Bitcoin. No one can stop them. So those are the sort of two biggest pieces, and that make today Lightning the most unique.
I wanted to say, and I think sometimes there's some antagonism from within the Bitcoin community to people that are building, right? And I think some's warranted. But I also think that folks that are possibly pitching these projects do so with the best intentions. I like to think the best in people, right? I know there's question marks, but I'd like to think it is. But I think in the end they come back to Bitcoin because the solutions that they're building, they come into the same barriers that the current financial system has. All the things that Dan just mentioned. If it requires someone to represent it, you're just kind of rehashing what's already here today. And so I think people like to think that they can do something else. And so I'm going to remain positive in the human race that they come with the good intentions. But I think in the end, the result is you come back to Bitcoin. That's why Lightning is so successful. That's why Bitcoin's so successful. All the other things that are kind of built, they struggle because of the inherent problems is that they're structured the same as what we've got today. They might be faster, they might do new stuff, but they're inherently the same. And that's not fixing the problems we have.
A little less charitable, but that's definitely a category of people who have come back from the crypto world who've realized, either they're recreating the financial system with trust as is today, or the approaches taken there on, what reasons why Bitcoin scaled in layers and optimize for security and neutrality make the most sense. So they do exist, but there are, just to warn the viewers, there are also a lot of people falsely claiming to be Bitcoin related when it's questionable.
Yeah, there are charlatans out there. Watch out.
Absolutely important to keep those core attributes that make Bitcoin so special in mind. Well, I'd like to think we've done a pretty good job of contextualizing Bitcoin payments and all just the wonderful content you guys have in your report. Just being conscious of time before we wrap up, Dan and Danny, is there anything in the report that that you'd like to highlight or that maybe surprised you that we haven't covered so far?
Well, that's a good question. Go on, Dan. You sound as though you got an answer.
We had a one big slide or one big page on the Bitcoin payments ecosystem, and people have created this similar things before a couple of years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? And looking back on it, I think just the magnitude of large, mature, traditional fintechs compared to what were a bunch of Bitcoin startups 5 years ago, and you probably couldn't recognize a logo on the page. Now it's brimming with well-known brands and major fintechs, and that we weren't even trying to be exhaustive. This was just like selective of some of the companies for illustration's sake, and it's still quite a shock to see how far we've come in that regard.
Yeah, it's a great chart, and has a wonderful global representation of it too. We're going to put a link to the report, obviously, in the show notes. And also, we want to link to the two articles, Danny, that you referenced that were authored by Roy, who's the CEO of Breez, who was a co-sponsor of the report. But, I think it really just does a great job of just showcasing how big the ecosystem is, all the different, we didn't really get into the different, layers of infrastructure. You have exchanges that consumers can utilize. You have liquidity service providers that more on the business side, or hosted service providers, or Lightning as service. And so there are different, and we touched on it a little bit, but not by name of the different levels of infrastructure there are, and how a business might, or what the dominant players are in there. Remittances, streaming, some of the social companies that are using it, but all of I thought the report was incredibly readable. It was so, obviously it's of interest to me, but it was like, I think even taking it from a lens of a consumer, the way that you showcase the stories that you told from the companies that are working in Lightning, and just how they use it, like from gaming to, luxury brands to, more in depth to charities, that, each of these solving problems, and the clear cut benefits that it gives by just finding a way to a curiosity about Lightning and the way to incorporate it, I thought was just a really usable document that is a roadmap for a lot of entities and individuals. So really appreciate all your hard work on that.
Honestly, thank you. And honestly, that means a lot, because we put a lot of work, everyone puts a lot of work and stuff, but we put a lot of work into this. And that's the hope. The hope is that you want people to understand where we are like I kind of bang on about at the moment, away from the ideology, the tech, and what's the opportunity we have, right? I strongly believe there's a huge opportunity for Bitcoin as an everyday currency, and we can see it through the report. And I can't imagine a more exciting time to be working in an industry that we are. And I think one of the things that I personally enjoy is seeing the tech has that global reach, has that financial inclusion, and the access that you can then bring can parallel the things that we've done with the internet. And again, to have that happen with value in the same way as information, it's never happened before. And if we can do that, and we can, that makes it even more exciting. And obviously I work with Breez, and Breez, we're trying to bring, self-custodial Bitcoin payments to as many people around the world, as many apps and services as we can. That excites me. Honestly, I wake up and I'm like, yes, like today's another day, let's go. and Bitcoin adoption grows, right? And the reason I'm so excited about this and what we see in the report is we're at the start of it. This isn't, the report doesn't say, hey, we're here, like Visa, we're done, this is it. It says we're at the start of this journey, and what an exciting breadth of different companies and use cases that we have. So when I see folks maybe on Twitter who are a little bit dismissive of it, I find that upsetting more than anything. I'm not angry at it. I'm like, how can you not be excited by this opportunity? You can build today. There's sources like, the Breez SDK is free to use. Go and put Bitcoin payments in whatever application you want. This is insane. We can literally move value in a way we've never had before. And you want to dismiss that? That for me is just sad. Like, we've got this opportunity. So that's where I've come from the report, is speaking to so many people who are enthusiastic about the future, who are excited about what can happen, about the opportunities that are there. I mean, amazing opportunity. And to write the report and writing it with Dan was just an epic experience. And I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. And I hope more people do too.
Well put there, Danny. I mean, it's true that it's such an exciting opportunity set that we have in front of us with this open protocol, right? And circling back to the kind of initial part of the conversation, a lot of the current focus kind of gets lost on the store value or, kind of Wall Street side, but there's this entirely new monetary protocol, which part of what Lynn and I also do is try to as well put a spotlight on, why is this interesting to get involved with for an entrepreneur or a tech investor? And you guys did a fantastic job highlighting the basics and snapshot of this, what can sometimes be a bit of an overwhelming topic or technology stack. So, just seconding your comments there, Lynn. Congrats to both of you, and thank you for the work you put into it. And I guess maybe rounding it off, Dan, any particular call to action or comments you'd like to add?
No, I think it's sort of as Danny said, right? I think a lot of people haven't even tried Lightning yet. They haven't used it. They may even have an exchange account that is already Lightning labeled. In fact, they probably do. So I just say to the user, like, there's nothing better than actually doing it and trying it. So, if you have some Bitcoin and you download the Breez wallet or use your exchange, go and buy something and use Lightning just as a test run. And then there's no greater magic than actually seeing how crazy it is to do that online instantly across the world with nobody being able to stop you, right? That's the fun and the magic of it. So just please go try it out.
I couldn't have said it better. It really is a magical moment the first time you see the technology work and how fast and immediate it is. Are you guys going to be presenting this report at any upcoming conferences, or are you speaking anywhere, or how can people follow the work that you do? Because I have a feeling if we've moved this far in the last few years, this won't be the last report that we see of this.
I think Dan has you've got a talk at PubKey next week, haven't you?
That's more on the core developer funding side of things. So yeah, I don't think we've got any scheduled talks just yet. Yeah, I mean, you can follow 1A1z at 1A1z BTC on Twitter. And yeah, we haven't committed to doing a follow-on in a year, but it certainly would be very interesting to sort of revisit this over the next 3 months and quarters and years as the space moves so quickly.
We've got a lot of interest that's come from the report, which has been really cool to see. Folks that are kind of what you both have said, that are new to the space, maybe didn't really understand it as much. Certainly, former colleagues within the fintech world have reached out after reading it too, and have mentioned that they didn't know things from it. We got Roy's going to be at BTC conference in Vegas, and he'll be talking about it there. And Umi's at an event coming up too. For us, at Breez, this is our bread and butter. We believe in Bitcoin payments. We believe in Bitcoin as a currency. Our goal is to bring Bitcoin payments to as many apps as possible around the world. And we're doing that. And that's thoroughly exciting. We obviously had our fundraise earlier in the year, which is nice. But that's just the start of what we're doing. We've got a lot of work to do, and bringing self-custodial Bitcoin payments to as many people as possible is kind of the goal. So yeah, I mean, I want more people to understand that Bitcoin is both a store of value and a medium of exchange. And if you come away from the report at least agreeing with that, seeing the world that I see, I'm going to be really happy. And then get building and come join us.
Well, thank you both for coming on. Hope to have you back on at a future date. Enjoyed the conversation today.
Thanks so much for having us, giving the opportunity to talk about Bitcoin payments. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Build with Bitcoin podcast. If you found benefit in what you heard in this episode, we'd truly appreciate it if you would like, share, or leave a comment on whichever platform you're listening, as this helps others find us, which is especially important for a new podcast. And as a reminder, our content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be considered investment advice or a recommendation to invest in any company or asset mentioned in the podcast. Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River, a full-service, 100% reserve custody, Bitcoin-only financial services company. For your next Bitcoin purchase, use our exclusive link, partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin. Thank you sincerely for being a part of the Build with Bitcoin community.